Quick note, if you wish to avoid spoilers, which you should if you haven't seen this show yet, you can skip to the rating section at the end of this video. The timestamp will be in the description below. ReZero. Starting life in another world. ReZero is a unique take on what I recently found out is termed the isekai genre. The protagonist is teleported from the modern day to a medieval fantasy world, and my god, what a canvas for this story to take place. We initially meet a mundane young man named Subaru. He's busy stimulating his local economy, when, upon exiting the building, he hears an echoey voice resonate through the air around him, and sees colorful air distortions in his path. Am I seeing things? Subaru wonders if gaming all day has made his eyes tired and prone to hallucination. He closes his eyes, and when he opens them again, night turns to light, and he is standing in the middle of a busy market area in a city with European architecture. And man, is it pretty. We see all kinds of creatures walking by. Demi-humans, lizards, foxes, sloths. There's tons of energy in the air, and Subaru knows he's in for quite an adventure. Hilariously, he has a 4-dimensional awareness that this isn't right, but he rolls with it anyways, which I guess makes sense for the malleable mind of an 18-year-old man-child. But at the same time, it's a little bit weird. After only about 10 minutes in this world, Subaru gets mugged by a group of thieves, naturally. While the thieves are beating him up, a lovely young half-elf shows up, sporting what is obviously the attire of the main heroine of this show. It turns out she was searching for an insignia that had been stolen from her. An insignia we later find out legitimizes her as a candidate for the royal election. The two decide to partner up as they search for her stolen item, bonding along the way. They get a lead to head to a building known as the Loot House in the slums of the area. It's night by the time they get to the worn-down place, and Subaru offers to go inside first to scope out whether it's safe or not. He knocks, but no one answers. He cautiously steps inside, and looks around only to be met with the corpse of the man running the shop. And then this shit happens. Uh-oh. Surely the heroine will bust in and save the day. Hey, what kind of show is this? Surely Subaru will now reveal his super secret protagonist powers and fight off the enemy, right? Well, I guess you got the first part right. Rip. So, if it isn't clear by now, what you just saw is the hook of the show, and it's partly the reason the story is so incredible. As we make our way through Season 1 and the first half of Season 2, we see Subaru making use of his ability, what he has coined Return by Death, either willingly or unwillingly, to push the fate of this world in his ideal direction. That direction being saving all the people he loves. He develops an interesting relationship with this power, and over time we can gradually see him much more willing to use it intentionally to reset events when there is simply no other way around it. The story is currently stuck in the Sanctuary, a home/prison for demi-humans surrounded by a barrier they cannot escape, which has been created by the Witch of Greed, Echidna. It's possibly the highest difficulty event for Subaru to navigate so far, and he's died many times already trying to take the right route in order to save his friends at the mansion from an assassin attack, while also saving the people in the Sanctuary from the impending bunny attack. And yes, you heard that right. We get a deeper look at Roswell as a character, and his malicious nature becomes much more clear. Not that it was a surprise in the first place. Dude's been fucking creepy the whole show. Subaru meets with all 7 witches, representing each of the sins, including the witch that gave him the return by death power. The season closes out with still no clear way out of the current save point, so to speak, but with a ton of new revelations. Satella, the witch that likely teleported Subaru to this world and gave him the return by death power, finally reveals her face, or so it seems, and she looks identical to Amelia and uses the same voice actress, so there are many questions on how the story fits together. There's nearly endless speculation, and that is a beautiful way to pause the story as we wait for part 2. So now let's get into the analysis breakdown of the good and the bad with what we've seen so far. We'll start with the good. Return by death plot mechanic. It should be no surprise that this tops the list, because it's the bread and butter of this story, and I'm pretty much mostly going to be talking about this for this segment, so yeah, be warned. There are so many great things that we get with the return by death mechanic. First, it allows the world to be built from a breadth-first approach. Instead of having to progress through a large quantity of plot events and settings, we can watch Subaru play out the same event several times and learn something new about the world or characters each time. This means the author is able to focus on fattening out the world with rich detail without needing to worry about planning too far ahead plot-wise at the same time. Second, it lets us encounter true tragedy, which helps drive the emotional impact of the series. The first thing that comes to mind on this topic is the stint in Season 1, when Subaru is struggling to find a way to save Amelia and the village from the witch's cult. Each time he resets, the bags under his eyes grow more apparent, and I gotta interject on this one real quick, to praise the sound production of ReZero. Listen to this unsettling clip following his last death before the white whale fight.
スバル君、どうしたんですか？はい、スバル君のレムです。
We can see and feel him gradually losing sanity as he dies over and over. He is forced to watch Rem sacrifice herself multiple times for his sake throughout this process, dying horribly each time. He even accidentally kills Amelia by trying to tell her about his return by death power. His mental stability is tested the most in this loop by far, having to fight off both the substantial amount of grief and his bloodlust towards the witch's cult. Bloodlust so strong, even Krush was like, nah bro, you gotta chill. Season 2 in general played down the tragedy angle quite a bit, and instead seemed to focus much more on world building, but I gotta give it up for this scene, shortly after Subaru gets torn apart by the rabbits and drags himself to Amelia to die. It was not only unexpected, but possibly the most disturbing scene we've witnessed so far.
スバル、眠たいの？無理しないでね。だってスバルっていつも誰かのために無茶して。
The thing with Return by Death is, of course, he can't tell anyone about it. He is utterly alone in a maddening cycle of being killed and reborn only to face the same seemingly insurmountable obstacles over and over again. It's a genius play on dramatic irony and creates a massive amount of immersion for the viewer. You can see how much it burdened him, too, when he is finally able to tell Echidna about it. The scene perfectly encapsulates the sheer isolation and internalization that Subaru has gone through up to this point. The isolation isn't even necessarily just a product of him being unable to tell the others about Return by Death. Subaru is simply operating on a completely different timeline than the others. He exists within a different reality. And as such, there will always be some level of disconnect between his seemingly legitimate continuous self and the others who are only continuous insofar as their experiences existed within the window of Subaru's save points. And this disconnect may very well create some deliciously complex moral questions later on in the story. You see, as I mentioned in the summary segment, Subaru becomes accustomed to death on some level. Definitely not indifferent to it. He still has his human instinct intact, and dying is incredibly frightening. But it creates this really interesting effect on his psychology. An effect that says, it's actually not the end of the world when a loved one dies, because he can simply kill himself to get them back. Check out Roswell speculating on Subaru's lack of grief when he murders Ram and Garfield right in front of him.
君はね、二人の死を悲しんでいないのさ。驚きはある、義憤もある。だけど悲しみはない。取り返しがつくものと君は思っているんじゃないかい。気づいた。
The way I see it, operating in a world like this over time has a hidden danger. The danger is that on a purely economic level, it devalues his loved ones, even if he isn't aware of it. No longer is there just one Amelia, or one Rem, or one Otto. In Subaru's world, there are actually potentially infinite numbers of these people. And what that means is that in the future, Subaru's brain might come to the logical conclusion that sacrificing one of these people is worth some type of return by doing it, perhaps something like important intel, assuming he can reset their death. Need I say more? There have been hints the whole way through ReZero. Subaru uses terms like save point, so it's already conceptually in his head that this is behaving similar to a game. How long until that starts to affect the way he views the quote-unquote NPCs in this game that he loves so much? Anyways, just a bit of a speculative tangent, but it really goes to show that by way of this one seemingly simple plot device, so many interesting concepts may be explored down the line. Moving on. Very rich world and world development. You know it almost immediately with this one. Fantasy medieval settings will never stop being the best settings, seriously. The locations are beautiful and interesting. There is an immediate sense that supernatural powers are controlling the world behind the scenes. The factions are varied, and it seems like no matter how far into the story we find ourselves, there is an endless supply of characters and dynamics to pull from. Which brings us to characters. The characters in this show are pretty good. We get an incredibly varied cast of personalities, and despite the sheer mass of characters, the important ones are written well. Even a somewhat minor character, Wilhelm Astria, is given the spotlight during the White Whale encounter, and we see a pretty moving backstory on him and his late wife. There's one particular example, though, that we all think of when we look back on ReZero, and it's obviously Rem and Subaru. Rem and Subaru's relationship went from this to this. And the payoff was beautiful. After a few loops in the mansion's starting point, I was pretty much okay with the idea of Subaru killing both the twins outright because they were annoying the shit out of me. They were rude and untrusting towards him for what seemed like no reason. Having a character that I absolutely hate turn around and suddenly become a favorite is something rare indeed, and it speaks to the author's skill in writing realistic and touching character development. Much of this credit needs to go to the voice actors who do a wonderful job of being their characters. They nail emotional moments, humorous moments, of which there are many, and no doubt play a fundamental role in immersing us in the story. Now, to be honest with you, there are probably endless things I could rave on about and what I liked about ReZero, but I'm trying really hard to make this video somewhat digestible, so fuck that, let's just move on. The bad. There were several relatively significant issues on the topic of realism and immersion for ReZero, particularly revolving around Subaru's behavior. Let's go from the least troublesome to the most. Why doesn't Subaru lie about being a psychic? This is the most minor critique I have so far. It's minor because I don't know to what extent he can use words to describe his ability without accidentally fucking up his current timeline, and it makes sense that he would be terrified of doing so when we think about this scene.
Emilia.
If we assume he can simply lie about the nature of his ability while still giving people the gist that he can see the future, it would have proved extremely useful in many situations to be able to let people know exactly what was going to happen next. And did prove useful when negotiating an alliance with Krush by using the White Whale as bait. In our current sticking point in the story at the Sanctuary, it would completely blow past Amelia's need to do the trial. Well, before Subaru got his qualifications taken away, but you get the point. Maybe he doesn't even need to lie. He could just point out an event is going to happen, which he has already done, and just offer no reasoning as to why he knows. I don't know. Seems like something that's at least worth a try. I mean, if I was in his position, that would be the first logical approach, given he's basically powerless by himself. Why doesn't Subaru have crippling PTSD at this point? His mental state before the white whale fight was absolutely perfect. It was genuinely difficult to watch those episodes, as the plot was dropping Grandma's hot diarrhea all over his face endlessly, only for him to be thrust right back at the starting point of it all. I'm not saying that he should necessarily not still have some of the good old protagonist energy running through his veins, but maybe give some indication that he's troubled? No? We get some very brief flashbacks occasionally, but just think about how fragile the mental state of a human really is. I mean, even one near-death experience is enough to rattle most people to their core. How should we expect someone who has died now at least a dozen times, and seen the people he loves die a similar amount, to navigate the world? There are possible explanations for this. First, you could appeal to the fact that death is now fairly normal. Roswell even speculates on this. Additionally, there could be some magic aspect of Subaru, such as a resistance to madness, that makes him significantly more difficult to make insane, either from Echidna's urine concoction or simply innately. Now, let's talk about what is currently, in my opinion, the most egregious offense this story has committed thus far. Why doesn't Subaru ask Satella anything? Boy, this shit made me so mad. The person who teleported you into this world and cursed you with the ability to return by death and go through insane hardship and tragedy is standing in front of you, telling you that she loves you over and over and clearly making an effort to comfort you. Why in the fuck would you not take the opportunity to learn a bit more about what's going on? The simple answer is there's no reason. The reason is that the author did not yet want to reveal the mystery of the story to keep us engaged. In doing so, he temporarily gave Subaru a 50 IQ and hoped we wouldn't notice. Guess what, man? We noticed. And here's the problem. Subaru's second trial was living out the consequences of all of his previous deaths, right? All the timelines in which he either killed himself to reset or died in the heat of battle. We watch all of these unthinkable presents, they call it, seeing what happens after his death. And frankly, it's pretty disturbing to think about. He then asks Echidna whether these realities were true. She tells him that only the Witch of Envy, Satella, would know. Then he just doesn't ask her? Isn't that kind of important to know, man? I mean, if every time you reset, you're essentially damning some copy of your loved ones to a brutal fate, doesn't it sort of become a little more important to not die? Now, you might say that Satella clearly states that this is the case, but let me jog your memory. Here is what she says.
あなたが死んでしまうことを、悲しむ人がいることを忘れないで。
It's not at all clear whether she is referring to her suffering watching him die, or some other party suffering, or the ones he loves in the alternate timeline. It isn't clear because he doesn't fucking clarify. The most pertinent question of the whole show is on the line, and it's underhand lobbed into Subaru's brain for this very moment. Subaru, are you damning countless amounts of the people you love with your deaths? Or are you not? Is it wrong to use Return by Death? Or is it not? Your only useful, vital ability in this world. Should you use it? Should you not? We don't know. Alright, let's close this up. I will now offer my rating of Re:Zero. I rate Re:Zero a strong 8.5 out of 10. The show is an absolute emotional roller coaster. It's filled to the brim with dark tragedy while at the same time offering up plenty of light and genuinely funny moments. The characters thus far are well written and very much feel like unique, meaningful additions to the story. Season 2 Part 1 had some logical/realism issues. While it didn't match up to the enjoyability of the entirety of Season 1, it would have been unrealistic to expect that in the first place. The revelations we took away from the last 13 episodes are likely to set the stage for great payoff in January, so let's look forward to it. Anyways, that's all for today. If you have anything you want to add to the discussion, go ahead and throw down in the comments below. I'm Kevin Hart. See you all next time.